Cryptozoology is the study of hidden animals. We're going to delve into folklore again today and talk about vampires. When we talked about werewolves, we saw that the beliefs about what they were varied over time and from area to area. The same is even more true of vampires. Vampirism has been recorded for millennia, though there were a variety of names for them, and many tended to be demonic creatures rather than reanimated human corpses. Today's notion of vampires originates mostly from 17th and 18th century southeastern Europe, partly from official documents and partly from when the beliefs of the ordinary people began to be recorded. Our term vampire comes originally from the 18th century Serbian term vampir. Vampires were mainly considered to be the reanimated corpses or revenants of evil people, suicide victims, or the result of being bitten by another vampire. In fiction, a couple of important books, John Polidori's The Vampire and Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, appeared in the 19th century and sparked interest in vampirism. Most people's perception of vampires today arguably stems from the novel Dracula, written by Bram Stoker and published in 1897. In Dracula, we see many of the attributes we associate with vampires. The ability to metamorphose into other creatures, the fear of holy items and of garlic, staking through the heart, and the need to rest on the soil of their homeland. Stoker drew on folklore for these things and also based the identity of Dracula on a historical figure, Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad Dracul or Vlad the Impaler, who was a ruler in part of what is now Romania in the 15th century. While bloodthirsty, hence the Impaler title, there is no historical evidence that he was thought of as a vampire at the time. In the ancient world, one of the Greco-Roman vampire beliefs concerned Empusa, daughter of the goddess Hecate. She was not human, but was described as a devilish bronze-footed creature who took on the appearance of a young woman and seduced men before drinking their blood. By the later ancient Greek period, the Empusae, plural, were regarded as spectres with the appearance of attractive women who preyed on men for sex and nourishment. Other types of vampire were the Lamia, who preyed on children, and the Striges, who fed on both children and adults. These were demonic creatures rather than humans, but the principle of feasting on blood was established. The ancient Greeks often placed a coin in a deceased person's mouth to pay the ferryman to take them across the river Styx to the underworld. The coin may also have warded off evil spirits, preventing them from reanimating the body, which may have influenced later folklore in that metal objects were often placed in the graves of vampires to prevent them rising. In 12th century Britain, William of Newburgh and Walter Map recorded stories of revenants, though the idea of vampirism did not really take off in England, and accounts are rare after this time. In 1645, the Greek librarian of the Vatican, Leo Alatius, produced a work about beliefs in Greece that had tales of vampirism. After this, more accounts of vampires appeared in Europe. In 1672, there was a scare in Istria, now in Croatia, where villagers believed that Giur Grando had become a vampire following his death in 1656. The local priest reported that villagers had heard knocking on their door at night, and that within a few days someone from that house died. Grando was also reported to have sexually assaulted his widow, something that only stopped after the priest intervened and warded him off with a cross. Eventually, some villagers went to the graveyard and cut off Grando's head, at which fresh blood flowed and he screamed. After this, there were no more attacks. There were many supposed vampire sightings throughout Eastern Europe in the 18th century. This is surprisingly late, well into the period of the Enlightenment, and after the so-called witch craze that had overrun Europe from the 15th to 17th centuries. There are actual governmental records for many of these sightings. Petar Blagojevic of Serbia, who died in 1725, was reported to have risen from his grave and gone to his son asking for food. The son refused and was found dead the next day, having been killed by Blagojevic. Soon other people in the locality also died. The body was eventually exhumed and examined. There did not appear to be any decomposition. His hair and beard had continued to grow after death, his nails had grown long, and there was blood in his mouth. The body was staked, causing great amounts of fresh blood to flow, and then burn. Another documented case of vampirism from the early modern period is that of Milos Sekar, who had apparently been attacked by a vampire years before his actual death. After his death, some of the locals began to die, and it was believed that Sekar was the cause, having turned into a vampire. Serbian folklore tells the story of Sava Savanovic from around the same time. He is reported to inhabit an old watermill and, after death, to have killed and drunk the blood of some millers who came to work there. The locals opened his grave and found an undecayed corpse inside. They drove a stake through his heart. It does seem that belief in vampires thrived in the arguably more superstitious and remote rural districts, but eventually throughout Europe, starting with the Empress Maria Theresa in Austria, laws were passed preventing people from opening up graves and desecrating bodies. The beliefs varied, of course, from time to time and place to place, but there were telltale signs that a person you were seeing was a vampire. Sharp teeth were one, the lack of reflection in a mirror or the absence of a shadow were two more. The idea that vampires could not be out in daylight seems a mainly modern one, possibly suggested by the fact that vampires were most common at night. The corpses of vampires were said to show no signs of decomposition, or to be bloated by, or covered in, the blood of their victims. Horses could be used to identify the graves of vampires in that they would stamp at the grave. Poltergeist-like activity in a house, such as flying objects, was also a sign that a vampire was about, as was an increase in unexplained deaths in the area. There were a variety of ways to protect yourself from a vampire. These included crucifixes, rosaries, holy water, garlic, branches of wild rose or hawthorn, or weapons made from wood or steel. Some beliefs held that vampires could only enter a building when invited in by the owner, after which they could enter whenever they liked. Methods of destroying a vampire varied. These mainly occurred when the supposed vampire was in its grave. Staking through the heart or mouth with wood or steel was common, as was decapitation or burning. If it was feared that a newly dead person might become a vampire, they might be buried upside down. Sometimes garlic, steel, coins, or even a brick were forced into the vampire's mouth, or holy water sprinkled on the body. While belief in real vampirism must surely be extremely rare nowadays, the creature does live on in the popular imagination, in books, films, and television series. They have not left us. Cryptozoology is the study of hidden animals.